Today we are discussing how to go from AI skeptic to AI champion with Vasim Baig, the AI guy, as well as Alina Rivelis, CEO and co-founder of AI Future Leaders. In this webinar, we introduce a 5-step acceleration framework that you can start using today to succeed with AI.
Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. We are super excited. At AI Future Leaders, we are going to have an exciting discussion with Vasim, the AI guy. And we're going to ask Vasim how he got this name. But Vasim is actually known in the industry as this AI guy. And he's leading Canadian Gen AI applications. He's a strategist and author and educator, and he's also a founder of an AI consulting company by the same name, Vasim the AI guy. He specializes in demystifying complex AI concepts. If you're interested to understand AI in simple ways and terms and to translate AI into business value, into actionable results, he's this guy for you. So he's a strategist, business individual, but he also has got this AI side to him, and we are very much excited. He's also known as the AI Sherpa, right?
Absolutely.
They call you, sometimes you get called the AI Sherpa. So you're guiding organizations, from what I understand, from confusion to being confident with AI, and even individuals. Sometimes you get hired by just individuals who are interested in learning more about AI, how to implement it, and how to grow with AI. And you have a very interesting approach to AI. And from what I've heard, is it true that you have trained over 2,000 professionals around the world?
Absolutely, Alina. Yeah, and I appreciate the introduction and the setup. And so I can get into some of my flavors of ice cream for sure. I am Vasim, the AI guy. Get you, share a little bit about my origin story as well. But yes, the fact is thousands of folks in about 15 cities worldwide, and everyone from, I think you mentioned solopreneurs, people who are small businesses, thinking about like, oh my gosh, how can I start to work with AI and solve some of my problems tomorrow? All the way to, I serve as an advisor. I sit on a couple of different boards and sub boards. And so for more of the strategic leaders that are thinking, 2, 3 years out, and what is the impact going to be on my people and, functions. So we get into a lot of conversations around this concept of AI and specifically generative AI and how it's going to play out at both the micro level for the individual and then macro level within, let's say, the system itself, right? And so it really, lenses are very, very important. And I always say that, right? There's a couple of like, anecdotal thoughts that you'll probably come across. You hear sometimes I'll say, keep the human in the loop, or the lens is very, very important. These are sort of sound bites and quotes. And you might even hear me reference a lot of my mentors because I absorb a lot of knowledge from people that I respect and value, people like you, Alina, and I'm able to collect some of that intelligence and then I kind of synthesize it and replay it back it out in a simple way. So yeah, we can get started. Would you like me to whip up my deck
Yeah,
and kind of
yeah.
just go from there?
Thank you for
Yeah,
preparing an excellent presentation for us. And we're very much excited about the 5-step acceleration framework. I would like to understand more about your approach. This is something that you coined, this 5-step framework to succeed with AI.
absolutely. So let me know if you all can see my screen up here, and then we can get going. Wonderful. Okay, so Vasim the AI guy, as Alina mentioned, it's a funny story. I got introduced, and this is a little slide about myself. You'll see me here hanging out at the Google Next conference, and you'll see my eyes dart from screen to screen only because I've got my slide deck up here on a big screen, and but I also want to engage with the audience and keep eye contact here. So you'll see my eye flit from time to time. And it's nothing against like, is my dog in the room somewhere? It's more just because I'm navigating between two screens. But yes, thousands of people, 15 cities across worldwide, and it's only climbing. And as you can see from the quick sample of clients that I've worked with, everything from nonprofits to small businesses to mid-market to large multinational corporations. And I pride myself really on making AI accessible and really easy to understand. So, demystifying it. And I do speaking engagements and webinars and in person, things like that. I lead workshops, and Alina mentioned sort of the one-on-one coaching. So the ice cream comes in a lot of flavors. Today is not about that. You're here to join us and you want to learn a little bit about the framework, and I'm happy to share. So I've got this concept around the 5 steps to accelerate AI, and we will save questions towards the end, but we encourage you to, drop them in the chat function. And I believe Alina or one of your partner, you can field some of those questions and keep on hand with those. But in the spirit of webinar style, we're just going to kind of blaze right through and go through some of this content. So I encourage you to keep up. But really today, it's about AI fluency. I want to introduce that concept to you because I want to give you a taste on what it's possible to become like a confident, AI and generative AI user. So we'll go into a little bit of this thing called AI fluency. I'm going to share some prompting tips for you all, as well as get into an open Q&A and discussion towards the end. So we'll start with a bang. There is a big problem, at least in Canada, and we talk about lenses. There's a global lens in terms of AI adoption, and some countries like Netherlands and Germany and some places in Africa and South America are leading the charge when it comes to, AI adoption, and specifically generative AI adoption in lieu of ChatGPT being released in 2022, GPT-4. Canada, unfortunately, lagging a little behind. So I look at this and we've got a very expensive problem because if you look at the stats there, 72% of Canadian businesses still report AI gaps, which means a third of us are not really using generative AI effectively. We probably have some kind of like, pattern recognizers or AI models or AI deployment that's happening, but really when it comes to the use of language models and how we can use it to augment our thinking and brainstorm or write things for us, there's still a little bit of a gap. And me as the AI Sherpa, I pride myself on filling that gap because in my practice, I've come across three different types of skeptics when it comes to learning about generative AI, right? There's the people who are very, very worried, right? They want to protect their information and they're always thinking about, okay, what's at risk? What is the security landscape? If I put my data into ChatGPT, is it going to be trained in all of my private conversations? So they're worried about that. There's the perfectionist who really wants to understand every single thing about large language models and how does it work in terms of transformation, in terms of RAG flows and all the science behind it before they get started. And then there's the pragmatist who, is like, I need to start seeing some immediate value before I do anything with generative AI or it's not worth it. So I tend to speak to all of these audiences and I come across a lot of people on all sides of the fence. And for those that are interested and ambitious and want to learn, fantastic. Sticking your head in the sand is also a choice too. I understand it's quite overwhelming with all the information that's out there. So this AI Sherpa methodology, it really was born out of that, right? As I meet people where they're at. I've been up and down the mountain of AI a handful of times, and specifically I say AI, but really it's generative AI. And whether you're a seasoned climber like Alina, who spent 20 years in this industry building out models and predictive models and machine learning models, then we can have a conversation at that level. Or if you're someone who's never put on climbing equipment before and are just starting out in their journey, I kind of meet you where you're at and we can take the conversation based on that lens. So the five-step framework that we're going to get into today really is to take you from this point, and it's something that you can use individually in your own explorations, but if you manage teams as well, you can think about how do I bring generative AI to my team and explore it in a way that's safe, responsible, and gets them to actually apply it. So we start with demystification, right? Like strip away the fear. There's a lot of confusion. The robots are going to take over the world. We've seen movies like Terminator and The Matrix, and people are like, oh my gosh, like this is AI and robot revolution. And so, okay, that's definitely a potential future, but the likelihood of that future, you've got to kind of think behind that wall where it comes like there is risk, but what is the likelihood of that risk and where do you play in that area? Second, we talk about demonstrating. So show other people some immediate wins and what is possible with using generative AI. You could start by writing like simple emails in the tone of Dr. Seuss and make it funny. You could plan like a trip for your family. You could plan a birthday party for your friends or someone in your community. So you can start having fun and demonstrate just simple use cases around AI. And once you have fun with it, then you can get serious. And then you can start to get more in the pragmatic side. You start to differentiate, right? So you as a personal individual human or you as a business owner start to think through like, what are my unique advantages and needs that I can help augment with generative AI? And then you start going into the action steps of deploying and then scaling across your organization. So we talk about deploying and dominating. And we're going to work through some examples of what this looks like and some examples from my practice and how I've helped others. So step one, demystify. Let's get into it. So if we take a step back, right, and the spirit of demystifying, this whole concept of AI, right, artificial intelligence, the ability for a computer to intake information, process it, and output something. But if you examine that word for a moment, we're actually talking about three different lenses here. And so it can get a little confusing. On the far left, you see there, automation is actually AI or artificial intelligence doing some kind of work for us based on specific instructions that we give it. So, this is like a process or a workflow or something like that that automates us through something that's a manual process. The second pillar or the second dimension is what we call augmentation. And this is really the idea around AI and yourself working together to accomplish things. And then the last one, which is a lot more advanced now, is what we call agentic AI or AI agents, where these functionalities in AI start to work completely independently without your input or on your behalf. Of course, you design them and set up the models and set up the structure, but it will work. It doesn't need to check in with you to figure out what is the next step in my workflow. And so on that subject, when we're talking about ChatGPT and generative AI, the focus of our conversation is going to be specifically around this concept of augmentation. And so if we go there and we say, okay, let's just zoom in on augmentation for a moment. What does that mean? So there's a lovely course out there by Claude, one of the owner of that company is Anthropic. There's a lovely AI fluency course out there. I highly, highly encourage you all to check it out. We can provide some links later. But there's a spectrum around AI fluency. And what I love about this concept is that before you even go into augment with AI, and let's say you have a task, you want to write like a research report or a marketing report or to build something out, you as the human being, and you'll hear me say this a lot, keep the human in the loop, is that you as the human being should really decide, where does AI play in this task? Where does the human, myself, play in this task? And where do we meet in the middle? Because AI is not going to solve all your problems, at least not today, right? Today's versions of the language models, my dog is taking a little walk, so I'm just watching her. Today's version of the language models or essentially are designed around that approach where they can't solve all of our problems. And a simple example might be a presentation like this, right? In this regard, I could get AI to build out the content. I could get AI to help me brainstorm some of the content. Am I going to get AI to line it up and make sure the logos and the fonts and the spelling are all taken care of? No, that is something that the human myself still has to go in and be like, okay, yes, does this concept make sense? Does this description make sense? Is the formatting right? And so forth. So in that example, I know for a fact when I'm building a presentation, maybe I'm going to lean on AI for my first draft in terms of my brainstorming. And if I need to come to the audience, what are the kinds of topics to talk about? But me deciding ultimately on the other side of the spectrum to finalize those 3 to 5 topics, and then me as myself to actually lay out some of the content. So this concept of delegation is very, very important when you're approaching your human AI interactions. So I love this concept of a best friend, right? And this idea that, and Alina, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but this idea around
Yeah.
generative AI, because it's been trained on so many different types of things in the world, I almost imagine like a best friend, right? It's got almost infinite intelligence on a subject, and almost infinite intelligence on a number of subjects because it's been trained on so many things. So my philosophy becomes like, if you go down that presumption, and it is a big assumption, would you not want to call a friend like that from time to time and converse with that and text with that
Yeah.
friend to get some help, some advice on my problems, my personal problems, some,
Yes,
hey, what would
for
you do
sure.
in this situation, right? So if we take
But you
that,
know what?
yeah, go ahead.
Sometimes this friend can make mistakes. So
Absolutely.
it can definitely hallucinate. And that just means that you're getting information that's not factual, that's not correct. And that just happens because of the way these models are built. And you know what? I'm using sometimes the analogy of Swiss cheese.
Mm,
Sometimes it has got holes. So I have been working with AI for quite some time, as you mentioned. And
mm,
what I'm seeing is that in certain industries, it's doing an amazing job, but not
right.
all the industries out there. And that happens to be why, because it was maybe trained on in certain industry like healthcare. A lot
Mm,
of data is just not available to the models. It's very proprietary, it's very much locked down. So
mm,
these models are built on public and publicly available information out there. And if something is proprietary, such as let's say medical or healthcare information, then
mm.
your bestie is not going to be you know as advanced in that particular topic. But this is an excellent analogy.
Beautiful. And I love that you kind of gave me a perfect segue around this. And you could probably speak to this slide a lot more than me, but essentially these large language models, because they're trained on public information, they are very, very good at pattern recognition, right? And so because of that, they misfire. So this idea around, and I try to explain it this way, that your bestie is doing its best to predict what you are looking for based on the inputs that you give it. It's not going to be precise, which is why myself, yourself, anybody on this call or anybody watching later, we could all put the exact same prompt into, let's say, a language model, and we would get slight variations in the output. They're going to be similar. They're still going to be as close as possible factually correct, but it will not be the exact same out because of this whole prediction over precision. And so that leads me to the third point, that to your point around like certain models that are trained on specific industries or they don't have that information available, we as the human must be kept in the loop always. You cannot simply just copy and paste the output and trust it and just move it off and paste it somewhere and label it as fact. Like you still have to discern it and be responsible for the outputs that you take out of these language models and use in the future,
Yeah,
right?
especially
Yeah.
in regulated industries. If you
Yeah.
are someone working in, let's say, in financial industry or healthcare, you may not want AI necessarily talking to your customers on your behalf. You would
Right.
want that human in the loop to validate that what exactly you are sending to your customers. So we do call that human in the loop approach. And that kind of removes the risks of AI maybe producing something that's not correct. And there have been a number of lawsuits in recent years because of this situation. Companies not realizing that AI can make mistakes.
Mm.
And they allowed, especially there was a case about a year ago, Air Canada allowed AI to talk to customers.
Mm.
And the AI chatbot provided misleading information, and that resulted in a lawsuit situation. That was a nice lesson learned for doing exactly this and making sure that, yes, you need to be evolving and you also need to have those guardrails in check.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. And so that my philosophy as I teach folks in a simple way, your best friend by very nature of hallucinations or some of the bias that it carries, it's a very, very confident friend and it may mislead you and it's going to make mistakes. So just be a little bit mindful. You can be angry at the AI, you can be angry at language models, but like your best friend who has slept a little too late, or slept a little too late the night before and is a little groggy, even though they're really, really smart, they may give you some misleading answers, right? And I love this quote from a former exec from OpenAI. His family is actually, you talk about medical industry, Alina. His family is actually from, I think both of them are surgeons, like his parents. And so his view on this is that surgeons make grievous amounts of errors and upwards of like double digits, like 15%, and a 15% of error of a surgeon is like we have left tools in the body. Okay, so his philosophy is that we have patience for almost the most grievous of human atrocities, like leaving tools in a body. But when robots or AI, things like that, make 1% of errors, we lose our minds. So it is a perspective shift because his philosophy around, even if you were to bring, let's say, AI and robotics into the surgery world, it would probably make like 99% success factors, whereas humans are already doing 85%. So it's going to be significantly better, almost like a 10 or 15%, 10 or 14% jump, but still we won't allow it because we're like, no, 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 we don't trust the robot. So
Yeah,
it's an ethical thing, it's a mindset thing.
it is.
But again, lenses and perspective is very, very important.
Yeah, think
So,
self-driving cars. If a self-driving car, God forbid, makes a
mm,
mistake, you're
mm,
going to be completely out of your mind. But we are seeing humans getting into accidents a lot, right?
every day, every
I
day.
don't even know.
Yeah,
The numbers, I think, is huge. But one mistake done by a self-driving car, and it's going to be all over the news. So
that's right.
it is something that I think it's some of the perception, and how we treat AI and how we treat machines. We have a slightly different bar set for that. And in our
Precisely.
minds, the way that we perceive this.
Yeah, it's neat. So, you know, always fact check, always keep the human in the loop. You'll hear me say it a lot through now and through time. Even no matter how sophisticated these language models become, whatever the future looks like, I think for the foreseeable future, put your own individual spice on things and make sure you fact check it and so forth before going forward. Because I'll go through some examples. Like you mentioned I sit on a couple of boards and board subcommittees. I had an individual that came to me and said he got all of his news from like LinkedIn and the hype and out there around, oh, AI is too risky and I can't use ChatGPT, it's going to steal all my information. So I said, okay, you know what, let's go into my own instance. I'll share a little simple prompt with you, something like you are a senior business advisor, help me write a 5-minute presentation for our upcoming board meeting, right? Just no proprietary information, nothing too sensitive, nothing regulated. Pop that in. 30 seconds later, he looks at this draft. He's like, oh my gosh, Vasim, this is going to change everything for us going forward. I'm like, yeah, Craig, go for it. Go run with that. Right. So just simple examples that exist out there where you start playing with simple things and it will fundamentally change your world. And it's changed my world. Alina, I'm sure it's changed your world. and it's a wonderful thing. So there's actually a great publication out there if you're concerned about where you can get good quality AI news from. I love this guy here, Pete Huang. Early on, one of the people I learned from in terms of how to prompt better. He is a co-founder of this lovely newsletter called the Neuron. Grew it to like 500K. He's no longer with that organization. The newsletter did get acquired by someone else, but he actually came up with a lovely prompting framework that I still use to this day when I'm educating others. And it's called the RACEF framework. So if you want to get better at prompting and you're finding that your prompting is a little lacking right now, this might be a way to kind of approach it. Because if we look at that publicly trained model, whether it's Claude, whether it's Gemini, whether it's ChatGPT, and whatever it is that your Microsoft Copilot doesn't, or DeepSeek, doesn't matter. The idea is that it's been trained on this massive amount of information, and it's going to draw from that from every single prompt. So what this way is you can say, hey, take on a role, pretend you're a product manager. And so then now what it does is like, okay, I'm going to just condense from all that knowledge that I know, I'm going to start from this base set and say, okay, I'm going to present it from this lens. So you give the AI a role. Then you might say, give the AI some specific actions, something to do. And then you might say, okay, context. So what I look at as context is all the little jot notes in your mind. Doesn't have to be coherent, doesn't have to be perfect English, but all of the meat of what it is that you have around this problem, or let's say you're creating like marketing material, all of the brand guidelines and the tone of voice, all of those nuances and those little details, give it to a language model. It will love you. And then the last two, examples and format, we say that they're entirely optional, but if you have examples of, let's say, a product description or some kind of like marketing communication that you need to send out, or a technical schematic, if you have examples for the AI to follow, fantastic. Be like, hey, reference these and make it look like this. And lastly, you can provide some kind of format. Hey, I want bullets, I want headings, I want it to be 700 words maximum. Or in the case if you want to write like tweets and stuff before they had character limits, you could be like, hey, can you limit to like 400 characters? So this is just a framework. Again, no hard and fast rule to it, but it might help you to be able to improve your prompts. I know it significantly has helped me throughout the years, but might want to give RACEFs a shot if you're finding that to be a little difficult. And so a simple example, as I said here, I won't go through it and share it today, but really you could say you're a senior partner at like a boutique firm with 15 years, that's the role. You can say, hey, can you create me some kind of a change management proposal? And then you start to give it context around your business and what your concerns are. And then you give it some examples around, hey, I have these assessments and phase communication strategies before. And then you can say, hey, just put it to me together and give me an executive summary, some kind of overview, and make sure the paragraphs are spaced out this way. So again, very, 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 very simple to follow. You could even have like a Google Doc on the side where you just plug and play your little, or an Excel file, and then just tweak and play accordingly and see what you get. Okay, let's move on to demonstrate. 2 out of 5. So there's this idea around demonstration. So once you start playing, think about something in your day-to-day where you're like, oh, this is taking me too long, or this is a task that I don't want to approach, or I want to procrastinate on this, because it's too tedious or boring, or a process where you're like, I don't even know where to start. Start with something like that. Lean on generative AI and pitch to generative AI and say, hey, I want to do this, but I don't even know where to start. Because, I had a marketing team that I had ended up working with where, they had 10 different team members, 10 different styles, communication, different demographics, different temperaments, right? And they were like, we're all communicating externally, but our tone of voice sounds completely different because we have 10 different humans, right? And that's okay. That's going to happen sometimes. We all have our different spices of life, but they wanted to have one cohesive brand voice. So I showed them some folders in ChatGPT. We created a tone of voice document, and that became the standard. And then all of a sudden, they were able to just all have a unified voice and very quickly, sync their email inboxes through like Zapier automations, but a little bit complex there. But we ended up reducing that 1 hour task to about 5 minutes. And she came back to me and said, Wasim, like I got a whole day back essentially across my entire team. So very, very quickly, you could use some of the innate functionality within these tools to demonstrate how you can figure things out with your team, right? Okay, let's move on to differentiate, number 3. And so this is where you start to do a little bit more of introspection. Not only if you're a business owner, you could look at, what your unique value proposition is. You could also look at your immediate team and say, hey, what do we do here better than anybody else, right? What special or secret knowledge do we have that other people don't? Like, what is our own individual spice? And that makes us really, really special. And what might give us an advantage, if you're taking the competitive mindset, over the people that are our peers or competition in the industry. So start to think through like what is that, and start to lean on AI to work those things, right? There's a lovely framework, and if you aren't following, there's a company out there, another, and I'll throw these along the way, but there's called Section AI, and what I don't know, Lena, you must have heard of them as well, but they're all about upskilling the AI class. But the CEO, Greg Shove, just stand up human being, and I just love what he's about. But they had this framework that they had shared in one of their webinars, and I stand by it. So yeah, it's basically called the OAT framework: optimize, accelerate, and transform. And really, businesses are all about TTT. Like, let's create a new product and service line with AI. Let's have an amazing client-facing chatbot, and they could do all these amazing things. And you talk about the Air Canada story, Alina, or some of these other mishaps. That's what ends up happening because people think about, okay, how can we make money and productize this? Whereas, Section and Greg encourage us to go the other way. Optimize first. Just start with your internal processes, your internal frustrations. Build out those things. And then once you get comfortable with generative AI and you get some success internally in pilot programs, then you can start to improve your product or service. And then eventually you can create something new. But you take baby steps to get there. And I think sometimes in big business, we really just want to start with T and just hit the ground running and go forth with that. So I love this framework from Section, and they actually have a prompt, and you'll get access to this deck later, but you can copy and paste this prompt. It's very, very handy. And it goes kind of like this: I'm deploying ChatGPT, but you could insert Claude or whatever language model that you use to my team at this company. You talk about a little bit your company description, in what industry, with number of employees, and then you ask the language model to say, hey, before giving me any recommendations, ask me 5 tailored questions about my business so you can understand, back to the context in the RACEF model, right? Give me all the context and needs, and then come up with about 50 to 100 ideas that we can use that are practical using models like ChatGPT. And this is a fantastic prompt for brainstorming and coming up with your unique ways that you can use ChatGPT to really optimize your processes and your business. Because we did this, right? There's a lovely lawyer that I had worked with, essentially, and she very, very specific knowledge set. You talk about, Alina, proprietary knowledge, right? She was dealing with like wills and estates and trusts for farmers in the agriculture industry. Like, farmers don't digitize anything. Everything is handwritten, and like, it's just written by old school contracts and things like that, right? In the old school way. So she had this entire database or repository which was had full of like scanned documents and things like that. So I'm not a builder like you, Alina. I could have introduced you, or we didn't know each other at the time. So I introduced you to another builder friend of mine, right? And we ended up building like an LLM for those specific patterns in the history and that non-public information that was sitting on her SQL servers, right? So all of a sudden, right, she could access all of that information without having to dig through like repositories and click it and click through. She could just query the internal database, and she could get things done so fast now. And those initial client assessments, significant
Yeah.
amounts of time savings, right? So
But for those
again,
lawyers out there and the ones who have got proprietary information, do not send your data just to a chat GPT. You do want to build something in-house, like in this example. You might have personally identifiable information. You might have financial information, sensitive data. You would want to have your own custom built application in-house that you can control, and you do need to monitor where your data is going, how it's being used, and you can definitely leverage AI in these types of industries. But very good example.
thank you. Yeah, exactly. And I know, Alina, that we know each other as these more custom to build start to come out. I can potentially lead on you with some of that expertise, right? Because it is very, very important in some of these regulated or highly sensitive or private
Yes.
information sectors, right? Yeah. Okay, we'll move on to deployment. So once you've got some differentiation under your belt, this is a simple 90-day roadmap that you can use, right? That builds off of the foundation that I've been sharing all the way, right? So assume you're starting off at this point, you've joined this webinar today or you're watching later, you know, within the first 30 days, start so small. Start with a single use case. Use the OAT framework, do some brainstorming, figure out something, start with a small team, start with yourself, and measure everything. What's working, what's not working, right? Go through that kind of like introspection, that assessment, figure out your prompting, what prompts are working, or what validation is working, and so forth. So that by the time you get into month 2, you can start to expand out to some of other teams or people or your peers that are facing similar problems, right? Sharing is caring. So go out there and share with others, because through that process of sharing, you will also learn in this process. I can guarantee you that. And then by 90 days, you can start, if you're doing this internally and you want to accelerate the adoption, start interviewing some of your peers, right? build those case studies, show those ROIs. And ROI can come in a lot of different forms, okay? So ROI could come in terms of time savings. It could come in terms of financial savings. These are good metrics, but you could also track ROI in terms of employee satisfaction, in terms of employee procrastination being lowered or employee frustration going down. These are also qualitative metrics that you will start to discover. And I highly encourage you get those sound bites and get those interviews so that when you take this information and you start to position this around the ROI around AI, you can go and take this to your leadership and say, look, we've got happier people. We've got more efficient processes, and we've got ways that we're unlocking new value based on the O in the OAT framework because we are optimizing things internally. And then leadership might take a look at that and be like, I see other areas that we can optimize. I also see other areas that we might be able to accelerate with the development of new products and services. So you're really creating and I'm going to steal, again, I talk about my mentors. There's a lovely gentleman that works for a company called Lighthouse Partners. His name's Greg Smith. He prides himself on creating these things called safe, brave spaces for people. And so what you're doing through following this process is creating a safe, brave space to talk about AI and generative AI that makes it a little less scary and a lot more applicable. So I encourage you to get out there and do that. Because even when we're dealing with heavily regulated industries, there was the gentleman that I had worked with where English was not his first language, right? And so we all know that ChatGPT, it's very, very good at English. And sometimes there are tells around if you just put something into ChatGPT, copy and paste it and send it over. There's the emojis, there's the M dashes, there's the very upbeat kind of like positive kind of thinking and so forth. And sometimes people will laugh at that and be like, oh, I know this was written by ChatGPT. But for someone where, let's say, English is not your first language, that might be okay. And that's the case here. So this job, the gentleman that I worked with, he was ended up like writing his daily safety reports because he was heavily regulated, had to produce these reports. So he started leaning on generative AI just on his own because he's like, oh, I'm struggling with writing this out in English because English is not my native language, but it's my job to write these reports. So he started writing these reports using ChatGPT. And at first, people caught him like, hey, is this guy really writing these? And they scoffed at it at first, but the quality of the output, because he knew how to computationally think and he knew how to articulate his thoughts, he just didn't have the vocabulary to put it together. So the heavy lifting of the vocabulary came to ChatGPT. He started writing out all these amazing incident reports. And within 3 months, they had scaled this whole process to three, like almost like half the departments in the organization. They started doing better documentation. They started training using his prototypes, and they created a lot of process improvements. So I encourage you, something great can be born out of your own, something that you're challenged with. Lean it on ChatGPT, and it's okay in the beginning if it's a little messy or people kind of like scoff at you. I just highly encourage you because it will reach a certain point where you will inspire others because the quality of your output is going to be amazing. Like it can just heavy lift some of the things that you struggle with. So this is a great example, and I highly encourage folks that maybe English is not your first language, you can lean on it for some of that strong poetic vocabulary, whatever the case may be. Because, if we want to mitigate risk in our organizations, I think it's very, very important to celebrate people. And I love that example earlier because he, early on they laughed, they scoffed at him. Later they celebrated him. So I would encourage you, if you see people using it and you see those emojis coming across, you can still celebrate that person because at least they're pioneers, at least they're exploring, and you can evolve the conversation and talk to them about what's working, what's not working. And as I said, track that in that the first 30 days, track what's working, track the time saving, the quality of improvement, the satisfaction scores, those frustration scores, if you want to call them, to be like, did frustration go down? And start piling with some willing people in your organization. Very, very important. And always celebrate your people. All right, last, we're going to talk about dominating. So once you're like further ahead, you're beyond that 90-day window, you're going to start to absorb some statistics, right? One of them is going to be the adoption rate. Who's using AI? What are they using it for? What kind of efficiency gains are we getting, right? What kind of new use cases are starting to emerge? These are the kinds of things that you start to measure and you start to talk about, right? I mentioned satisfaction about the team. You really want to see their enthusiasm level because there are people who are going to play with AI and just kind of use it at the side of their desk, and that's okay too. But if you really want to ignite others, get the people and put together almost like a consortium or a coalition of people that are excited and enthusiastic about AI, because then those kinds of innovations and those collisions will begin, right? Very, very, very important. Because there was a woman one of my former students, maybe last year, she was so skeptical of AI, right? She was one of those people that, oh my God, the robot revolution, they're going to take over the world, and I'm not touching this. And so when we got her onto using like Gemini and Gems, very, very quickly she started writing her own prompts, and she was using it for silly things. And I say silly things, but they're actually important, like planning her trip to Portugal, or she would lay out her. This is the cutest thing. She would lay out a couple of her outfits on her bed, right? 3 or 4 different outfits, and she would take a picture and she would put that into Google Gemini, and then she'd be like, "Hey, which outfit should I wear for going out to Shingle Girl?" So she was like, "Which outfits am I? I'm meeting this guy, blah blah blah. Which outfits would look nice for this kind of a venue?" And she would get into conversations about those types of things. And so once she started to see that, oh my God, I can apply this in ways that is actually meaningful to me, very quickly she's like, oh my gosh, there's so much power here. Within 6 months, she became the #1 advocate at her company and was like the innovation leader, unlocking use cases left and right. She was leading webinars like this. She was hosting lunch and learns all of the side of her desk, and making learning about Gen AI fun. It was fantastic to see. Because once you start to do that, we're going to start to, and Alina, you and I have seen this already, that AI becomes a part of how we work. It's not extra. It's fundamentally like it becomes a part of our very existence. Almost like we have our cell phones, and we use that all the time, or we've got our AirPods when we go for a walk, or whatever the case may be. Leveraging generative AI has become like that, right? It becomes an extension of who we are, which for better or worse, we don't know how the net result's going to play out. But I truly love what we've been able to do so far with it. And your team members become those AI advocates, they become those teachers, and the more people you have doing that internally, you're just going to scale your value that, other people who are sticking their head in the sand, or, if they're arguing about, our data being breached, and they're not taking any steps to, let's say, create custom LLMs internally, they're going to struggle to match you and your people. So something to think about. So I'll leave you some parting thoughts. Let's recap what we looked at. Hopefully you got a taste of like how you can become a little bit more fluent and confident in your use of generative AI. We went from demystifying all the way to domination. This concept of AI fluency, you really want to think about what do you delegate when you're approaching generative AI. You could try out the OAP framework to brainstorm some ideas internally, optimizing, accelerating, and transforming. And then you can try the RACEF prompt technique if you're struggling with your prompts and being like, how can I get this prompt right? There is no perfect way to prompt things. Anybody can tell you that. You have your own individual relationship and your unique relationship with AI. You are a beautiful thinker, and as a result, AI will help to augment your own thinking, and it's going to be very, very unique to your situation. So in the next 48 hours, if you want to kind of adopt this internally, this is my encouragement. You can take this as homework. Pick one person on your team. If you're the only person on your team, then start to get curious about AI and choose one task that you do regularly that pisses you off, or you think could be improved. And then use the RACEF framework to kind of brainstorm like what could be solutions to that, right? And then over the next 30 days, measure that result, and document your learnings for your own self or your own team. Because I'm Vasim, the AI guy, and I just want you to get good with AI. That's all I care about. I want to accelerate you. I want to make sure that you can apply AI immediately. And, we have this lovely, lovely quote from another one of my mentors. She's the CEO of a company called Agentive. And she says, you can look out into the world and you can see all the negativity, you can see all the fear around AI. And of course, there are storms we can't imagine, but there are also opportunities we can't imagine. And she goes, we're at a place now where we are all writing history together alongside the robots. So, I encourage you to think about what story will you create. My name is Vasim, the AI guy. If you want, you can take a picture of this screen, or you can just get the deck later, but you can feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. I do things like this, but I'm all about advocating the use of safe, brave AI in a responsible way. And we just want to get you applying and accelerating as soon as possible. I thank you all for your time.
Well, thank you. This was excellent. I'm sure our audience found this very interesting and insightful. You gave us very relevant and hands-on type, advice as to where do you start with AI, how do you actually get good with just like you said with AI, the 5-step framework where you get curious about the AI, you adopt it, you try it, and just stay curious, keep learning, and do follow us on LinkedIn. Do follow Vasim on LinkedIn.